Voidtrain is a game about trains. Just kidding, Voidtrain is a game about flying trains. The main idea behind Voidtrain is that it's very similar to a survival game called Raft, in which you wake up on a raft and you're kind of tied to this thing where you build your base on it and it moves around the world with you. In Raft it's an ocean, and Voidtrain it's what they call the void. And you build up your resources, you build up your base, and you gather resources from around you as you travel the world. In Raft, this is executed by throwing a hook around. Sometimes you jump in the water, most of the time you don't. And in Voidtrain, you literally jump off the train, anchor yourself to it, and fly around. Basically swimming through the fog that surrounds you all the time. That is the long and short of Voidtrain. Now, I have not technically completed the entire game, but I feel like I did experience pretty much all there is to offer in my about 16 hours of playtime in it. Now, if anyone has any disagreements with that, if they feel like I didn't hit anything, or if I just missed something, just didn't play quite long enough, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll stay in, maybe edit this review, whatever. I did not play co-op with this game, and this game does have co-op. It seems to add a decent amount of people to it. However, I don't think this impacts the gameplay experience other than just speeding up your progression, and not even to that great of a degree. It doesn't seem to have any real unique features of co-op that other games have. Its building system is kind of lackluster, so I don't think that changes too much about the game, and it doesn't really affect my review too much. It is an early access game, so the caveat that comes with that is obviously it is an unfinished product. Now, there's no dev roadmap, so it's hard to judge this early access title for what it is. The devs do claim it's about 50% finished, and that's what's actually in the early access so far. But that's so ambiguous, it's really hard to know what they will improve and what they won't, so you'll see a lot of guesswork going into this. Another important thing to do with these early access titles, I think, to really get a good idea of what the final product will be, is to take a look at the developer, if they've made anything before or whatever. This developer has, actually. They did make a game called Desolate in the past. An important context to Desolate is that it was actually originally based on a game called Beyond Despair. However, long story short, it was a game that they put into early access but quickly had to take down for various reasons. They later reformed what they had worked on into this game called Desolate, which is a kind of survival horror game. My experience was that I didn't play a whole lot of it, just an hour or two. It looked real pretty, but didn't have a whole lot of real solid content. It was very glitchy, and you can see this reflected in the reviews. When you look at Steam reviews of this, you see people saying things like, people hating on this didn't give it enough time, the combat gets better when you level up. Take that with a grain of salt. Not everyone has always gotten far enough to experience those things, but there's also a certain level of, shouldn't have made it so hard to progress. I know that was my reason for not finishing Desolate the first time around, even in co-op with a friend. They did release right away with pretty lackluster reviews, and they fixed some of the issues that they had complained about. However, they did actually end up just taking Desolate out of early access, with a lot of these issues still intact. So basically just saying this game is released, it's the final product. Now after this, especially within the last couple of years, because it was in January of 2019 that this was actually released out of early access, they have worked on it a little bit. I'm looking at their news page right now, and it looks like they're talking about there's a new combat system with it they just put in working on it in May, looks like, which is great. However, doesn't change the fact that they did release an early access game out of early access without fixing a lot of the issues that really had it fallen behind. And I mean, when I played this game and I had issues with it, this was like maybe 4 months ago. So not very long. I've done a small amount of research on this, just looking at different people's videos, looking at how the company did and how the original games did. I tend to take a easier view on them, and that, you know, this game just didn't do very well. It just kind of was never going to do all that well after kind of the rocky start it had. It didn't do terribly, it did moderately okay, but they just decided, it seemed like, to me at least, they just decided to cut their losses and then start on this new project, Voidtrain. That's kind of what it looks like from the outside. I don't have anything specifically telling me that, but that's just kind of the hunch that I have. Another caveat to this game is that it has released as a temporary Epic Store exclusive. Actually released on August 12th of this year. Looks like there is going to be a Steam release. They don't have a specific date or month. It just says 2022, which I guess that's just what Epic signed for. It seems like they got the money to hold them onto their platform for a little bit. You know, depending on how you feel about that, that might be a deal breaker, or maybe you can just wait and see how it turns out on Steam. As I might have mentioned before, Voidtrain really is a basic clone of the survival game Raft, and I may be doing some comparisons to that in this video. It deserves it. It's quite samey. It does do some unique things that I think are great and are innovative, but it probably needs to be compared to a similar game in the genre, especially for its $30 out the gate price tag for an early access game. When you look at Raft and how it's retailing right now for $10 cheaper at $20, and it seems to be, at the moment at least, a much more finished and polished game with actual expansions coming out for it. So the first thing, let's talk about the gameplay loop. So the first time you jump through the void, you'll start with your little tiny train car with just your trolley pedal there to get you moving a little faster. Sometimes the narrator will bug you about it to let you know to use it. You have your brake, you have your transmission to switch directions, and you have your little horn. The narrator talks very rarely and occasionally to guide you through some minor tutorials, but most of the tutorials are done through text. You'll jump off your train, hitching yourself up with your rope so you can't go too far from it, and pick up resources as you pass by them. In proceeding routes, as you get further, every route starts with this little shark bastard that will attack your train, although he really doesn't pose much of a threat. Not at all like Raft's shark in the beginning, right? Raft's shark in the beginning will actually destroy your raft fairly quickly if you don't bump him off. He's actually extremely hard to kill, whereas this, fog shark is pretty easy to kill. It's just kind of annoying and takes a long time. My strategy, especially in the beginning, was just to kill him and then move on, and then you do not see him until you get to the next loop. You don't see any enemies really at all, especially in the early game. And again, you just keep moving, you fly through the sky, which again is a really unique and fun feature. I think it just needs to be implemented better, whereas in Raft you have your hook that you grab things with, so it's kind of a skill-based thing. You have to aim it properly, whereas with Voidtrain you kind of have to jump off and you can only go so far, then you have to go all the way back to your train and then manage your inventory and then do it again. Whereas with Raft you just go and grab it, you don't have to move too much, it's just mouse movements, which may seem like a small complaint, but does save time and make it a little bit less annoying. Another thing about the loop is there's no differing directions. You're always moving in the same directions as far as I can see. It doesn't seem like any further progression in the game would have showed me that we can move in different directions and move to different locations on purpose. For a majority of the game, you're just moving in one same direction with a few debris scattered around you. You collect resources, and then you research on your table, and then you repeat that. You jump off your train, grab resources, research on the table, maybe craft a few things, do it again. And then you just repeat that until a depot comes up, and that's when you kind of go into this little teleportation experience where it brings you to this place called a depot, where sometimes you'll fight Nazis and kill them, sometimes you will upgrade your train, and especially in the early game, sometimes you go there and there's literally nothing there at all. the good. One thing this game nails is the atmosphere. It absolutely nails the atmosphere, especially in the beginning when everything's fresh. There's all sorts of little tiny noises and beasties that are kind of floating around here and there. It does get samey after a while. There's not a whole lot of variety, but the variety is something that I can definitely see them adding in as early access changes, as it seems to me that every loop, depot to depot, is procedurally generated. So that's absolutely stuff they can add into and change. The good, again, is the train. Having a base that moves around is a great concept, albeit not an entirely original one. The train is pretty durable, which is different from raft, whereas your raft isn't very durable until later. Your train is pretty much durable the whole time. It's really, you have to be negligent to let the air shark take out your train. You have to be extremely negligent. The resources are pretty easy to be found, although they're tough to acquire sometimes. Sometimes you just miss some, and you look back from a different perspective, and you see, oh man, that's all that stuff I missed. And that's just unfortunate, but you do find plenty of resources. There are areas that you can find later in the game. Unfortunately, these do only come at about 8-10 hours in the game, which in my opinion is a little bit too long. Again, that is a fixable problem, so I'm still putting this in the good column because they're cool areas. The thing I like the most are these arenas where you step off onto sort of a train dock, and you grab this little pigeon thing, and it takes you off to a different area, and you fight these alien bug-looking things in an arena, and you kind of gamble with how long you can last to get more rewards. Again, it's a common mechanic, but one that I think mechanically, all that stuff I just described is executed pretty well. Also, around the same time, you're finding these abandoned train cars, which just add to the atmosphere tremendously. They're very cool, makes you feel like maybe someone's gonna knock my train off, you know? Again, the best good thing they have about this is the graphics. The game is absolutely gorgeous. It looks extremely polished and well done. Oftentimes, I was just floating around. I was just kind of astounded at how good certain things looked. They're starting at a really good place with how things look, which sort of like Desolate. I remember Desolate looking very good. So if they can nail down the gameplay portions, the graphics I feel are already there. They just need to add like some collision to some things, which don't already, and I think we'll be in a really good spot. Now let's go to the bad. To be honest, the bad is going to be a decent portion of this because, well, it is an early access game, and we should look at the bad in the context of stuff that, you know, some of this might get changed or fixed. For the most part, I tried to be generous with it as far as what's fixable and what's not. So the first thing that's the bad that definitely comes to mind is the combat. The AI is pretty rough. Oftentimes they'll just sort of stand around when you're shooting at them, especially the German soldiers. They almost never push into you. It's pretty easy to dodge attacks. I know sometimes I just use a simple, at a certain distance, just strafe left or right, sometimes consistently, sometimes back and forth. Hey, turn around. Turn around. There you go. There you go. And they would just miss you completely. Especially in the arena, where you're fighting the little aliens monsters. If you're just far away enough, they'll just ignore you. So my strategy for the second time in the arena was just kind of running away. They would move on, and then I would just sort of shoot them from far away. Which, the only drawback from that, which besides being kind of boring, is that the enemies would just kind of move into random directions. They would never retaliate when I shot them from that distance, for the most part. And then I would have to hunt down the last one, while he's also chasing me in odd ways. I'm trying to find him, and then took me like 10 minutes to find at one time. As far as difficulty goes with the combat, the only way the difficulty ever scales is they add more enemies. Which unfortunately just felt like I was playing the main portion of Destiny 2, but even less fun. They were just many different small bullet sponges that didn't do a whole lot to me. Damage is another thing. It doesn't never really properly scales. I never felt threatened by the enemies really at any point, except for my first arena fight, which I just sort of walked into because nothing was difficult beforehand. And towards the end of that, I did feel like a little bit damaged, so I bowed out a little earlier than I wanted to. I still lasted like 4 full rounds, I think. damage. You could just make things damage you better, and that would be a way to increase difficulty, albeit it's not the best way all the time, but that would definitely help things a bit. It was not difficult, even in the slightest. The best gun I found in the game is the beginner pistol you find that has infinite ammo. That's a problem, in my opinion. There's no real progression with any weapons at that point. Once you try one of the guns you get later on, you realize that the pistol just is miles ahead in almost every way. Especially because you've been using the pistol pretty consistently at that point, and you're really good with it. Or you should be. I do like the fact that the other guns you find can jam and you have to fix them on the fly, but again, it's one of those things, it happens too often to really make it worth using. Even if that was the only thing that was bad about them, I would still consider just using the pistol. But the fact that the pistol is also very accurate and does a decent amount of damage for every shot kind of makes it worth it. For the first 8 or so hours, there's almost no combat. It takes you a long time to find any Nazis, and your first Nazi combat in a depot is very lackluster. There's like maybe 5 or 6 guys to kill. It's kind of a damn shame, because it's sort of the only shining light in the monotony of this loop that you're going through of just jumping off the train and grabbing stuff and occasionally missing stuff. After about 12 hours is when you begin to find the arenas that are spread out through the world, and those are, again, another kind of exciting thing, but once you do your second one, it's kind of, it's samey. I went about another 4 to 5 hours after that, didn't find any other combat experiences, although there were more of them. At that point, it was mostly a kind of, like I said, Destiny 2 bullet sponge thing. There were other small glitches with the game. The way that the cable tie works in the train, basically it slides on the side, which is graphically very pleasing, but when you have multiple cars, it doesn't jump from one car to the other very well. So sometimes you're just trying to get to the next thing, and you're just stuck and you can't go to it, even though your train is long enough and you should be able to. You just can't, unfortunately. There is this cover lean when you're aiming your pistol, which does extremely odd things. You'll just like cover lean. It looks like you're leaning in the wrong direction. Now the pistol is totally accurate with this. It's just as accurate anyway when you look at the crosshairs, but it does like block off part of the screen, which is kind of annoying. Not the part of the screen you feel like it should. And it also just kind of activates at odd times. I remember like there were some chests on my train in the late game that it would just activate when I was trying to aim at something in the sky, and it was like, okay. Again, the difficulty's laughable, not just in combat, but the puzzles that are occasionally found are just kind of not very difficult in any way, just very samey puzzles, like basic stuff. Again, the combat and this difficulty is stuff that can be tweaked and totally changed. From what I can see, the devs talk about how the difficulty actually ranks up based on your train upgrades. I don't think this is totally accurate. I think they're just kind of simplifying it. I think it's actually tied to your research table tiers. So I made it through about 24 of them, and there's 30 total. And the game pretty much never challenged me at any point. And so I didn't really feel like it was going forward. Speaking of the research table, it's another kind of problem with the game. Now, it's not a new feature of some of these survival games to require that you spend resources on the thing you want to learn how to create. And then it consumes them. That's not new, but it's definitely one of the more annoying tropes in these survival games, and one that I think needs to just go. It's not fun, it's really annoying, especially in this game in particular, because of how you have to gather resources. It's very annoying to gather those resources, jump between crafting post to crafting post to crafting post on your thing, going in a weird zigzag area because maybe you didn't plan it out properly. And then you spend all those resources and you have to gather them again. You can only stack 5 items in a slot, and you don't get that many slots, so there's a whole lot of like, I have to rearrange stuff, or I have to always be, making stuff and always be putting it in the research table. There is no stocking up, really, until you get to late game, and even then, it's kind of hard to do. It takes up a lot of time. Maybe this is a spot where having a co-op person could help, but that's a pretty boring job to saddle on a friend, or have that be saddled on you to do. Just resource management and, organizing things for the hours that you're playing. It's not a great time, in my opinion. Again, this isn't good. It doesn't feel good. Just don't consume the resources when you research something, or just give us one of those items to use once you've researched it. Like, if I research a workbench, just give me the workbench when I give you the items, and then it won't be annoying anymore. And then if I need to make another one, know how to make it. Again, the loop becomes very boring. It doesn't really ever change. There's some minor things like finding the abandoned train cars, but they don't ever have anything unusual inside them or anything interesting. It's the same old resources, if you find any. I know this one time I found a whole line of them, and they didn't have any resources in them at all, except for like one piece of wood, which is one of the most plentiful resources you can get. There's a lack of context sometimes for how to move things forward in the game. I know. So when you do the puzzles that the game has to offer, you get these chests, and you have to go to a depot to use them, and that's all they tell you about it. So I went to my next depot. I got this chest. I was pretty excited. I was like, oh, there must be something really good in here. Spoiler alert: it was just kind of some resources. Although some later chests, you get some better stuff, like higher level stuff. You get some seeds for your garden, but those are kind of lackluster as well. Anyway, I was searching for how to even use this chest around. I had to actually, because the Epic Game Store doesn't have a discussion board, I had to go to Steam. And then Steam wasn't really helpful. It was a bunch of people complaining that the game wasn't on Steam and it was on Epic. So, go figure. After looking around online a little bit, I went to their I believe I went to their Twitter, maybe, and ended up joining the Discord server, and then found the answer in the Discord server. So it's a lot of jumping through hoops to actually get the answer I needed, unfortunately. I did end up getting it. There's just a little altar that's there in the depot that you kind of chuck the chest onto, and then it just kind of opens it. Now, there's no, as far as I remember, there's no tutorial or text or anything that tells you about this altar. It just says there'll be a way to open it, as far as I remember. So, maybe that's incorrect. I'm pretty sure, though, that I don't recall this at all. The last real bad thing is going to be definitely the story. There isn't really anything besides the beginning exposition before you even start the game. There's this little drawn story that sort of guides you through the background of, you're running from the Nazis, you find a book in the shack with your other engineer friends, and you guys find a way into the void. Uh-oh, there's Nazis in the void too, whoops. And that's pretty much the only story. And then when you start the game, there's not even this cool cutscene that you have when you start the game in the trailers. You just kind of wander around this room that's pictured there, and then you jump into the void, basically. You touch a couple things and jump in, and there's some Germans yelling at you at the door. Again, that's the only bit of exposition that happens in this game at all, except for the narrator sometimes yelling at you and telling you to do specific stuff to further your progression, which isn't bad, but doesn't actually add anything to any story. The trailers made it seem like there's going to be, to me at least, like a lot more story stuff in the game, cutscenes maybe, something moving you forward besides just, it's a survival game and I want to progress. Which, for me, that's part of the reason I wanted to play it, so it's a little disappointing, but that's fine. It's not unheard of for that to be the case. I think there's some other games like that, so it's not crazy. But, it seems to me like you could at least have that cutscene that we saw in the trailers. I mean, there's no tension there. You just kind of wander around. You can kind of wait around and hear them yell at you, but there's no, you can tell. You could stay in that room for hours. You could stay in that room the whole 20 hours you're going to play the game, and they would never bust in. Now, I mean, if there was gonna be more story, it was probably stuff they've already ironed out by now. It seems unlikely there's gonna be anything like NPCs to speak to, or any cutscenes, or conversations to move any of the story forward. It seems like it's gonna be like kind of this infinite loop until maybe you reach a basic ending to start it all over again. But, that's my guess. It seems like if they were going to have that stuff in there, it would be something that was already added into the game at this point, or at least the basis of it, which at this point, like I said, there's nothing. In conclusion, Voidtrain's an early access game, in my honest opinion, with some of the stuff, like the combat being pretty lackluster, not difficult at all. The survival aspects, like jumping off the train, just not feeling as good as others, especially when you compare it to games like Raft. Probably waiting for more content would be good, but as of right now, I think just should be avoided. Let it develop out a little bit. All in all, I'd say probably give this game a rating of 32 beautiful flying manta rays.